Sanibonani emakhaya sonamukele ku Daily Thetha la kulesithathu namhlanje. Sasajabula ukuthi senikhona ngesikhathi ese-right nje ngo10:30 kanje. Siyazi ke ukuthi isikhathi esi-interesting eMzansi kwamanje. And siyazi ukuthi kuningi ngoba the elections are happening, but as they happen,
listen, we're seeing through the tricks. I just want to let you guys know, even if as Nicolette, I give construction, I get you na earthwork king, I get you the palisade king, Mara get you construction king, Mara or 15 million, even young, Kiajiva.
And it's sad because the story, of course, has made headlines in Mzansi. And which, of course, a 15 million rand being said to be used for a particular stadium. How do they even tell us that it's the truth?
Yeah.
We also saw a very scary moment where we saw the DA come out and put out posters as they are campaigning for the local elections. And Bazbona Guti, for them to put out a statement that says, the ANC called you thieves, criminals, but we called you heroes. And this happened, of course, at KZN Phoenix as they campaigned, which for me, in Tebhlungu, because this is how we see dirty politics come to the floor.
Definitely. It's actually very discouraging, you know. It's discouraging that political parties still need to use that type of emotional clickbaiting. It's not right.
Asithembe ukuthi bazonza kangcono. Bukele khaya ngikubingelele igama ledwa kamiya ucwanini usibe uzizwe umunja ngempela ke namhlanje sijabule ukuthi sithole ithuba ukuthi sibe nani. Ngomhla ka4 October it was the commemoration of World Habitat Day, which gave us the opportunity ukuthi si reflect kancane, of course, in the state of people, towns, cities that they live in, but also the basic access to, of course, adequate shelter. Local makes us think kancane about uhlelo lesizolo la sikhuluma khona about spatial planning and how the lack of spatial planning igcina seyithinta the local township economy. Now, which, of course, is how do the South African person who comes from different disadvantaged backgrounds gets to navigating owning a home? More importantly, what are the challenges that we might not know about?
Nicolette it's because it's mine. I own it. Owning something is so important when it comes to being a human being. That's really what it's all about. It's being able to say something is mine. We don't even need to go into the conversation when it comes to a home. We've seen how important home ownership is. When you look at people going on the streets and protesting around the delivery of RDP houses because they were promised an RDP house. We see in families, but who does the house actually belong to? We've seen many people sit across bank consultants and not be able to actually afford their home loan. Home ownership is something that we all want, or at least aspire to. Let's navigate that conversation today with you. Remember that you can send us any of your messages on our social media pages. Just remember to please hashtag Daily Thetha or 011-339-1315.
Yes, Nicolette also speaks about something very tough. But they do not even earn enough to be able to qualify for a home. And it then makes us think,
What's up, Daily Thetha family? It's your boy Mabhena, the leader of the pack. Namhlanje we're uncovering the frustrations that people have when it comes to home ownership. But then what's the mapuzi? So, what is the importance of home ownership?
Well, home ownership is because if you keep something, at the end of the day, anybody can walk in and have a document no, actually I own it. And ownership is because some sort of because if I die tomorrow and I get ownership, anybody can move my child out and say, Samai, and then what?
Ownership, to be honest, it's very important. Ukuthi ingane zami zibe nekhaya, nami mangihambile ngazi ukuthi nginekhaya and ingane zami zisafe ukuthi zibe nendawo lezo khona ukuthi sihlale khona.
Yes, ntwe uhlokwa ka go owner legae ka go ke chokore legae ke ka mo re phelang ka gona ke mo re dirang everything nka gona, like a o kula wa gona go ba ko legaeng la gago be le family ya gago ba nke ka wena, like o ba le bana wa ba tlhokomela ba e sekolong le wena o ye mmerekong, like ba bue ko gae ba tseba gore gae ke ko kae wa bona.
The importance of owning a home makes you feel whole, because living in a home instead of a house makes you feel whole, you know, like you don't have to fall around and things. You at least know where you can fall back to sleep, love, see your loved ones, and etc.
Daily Thetha family, nayi nami ndivele abantu bendixelela uba kwenzeka ntoni xa kufumene indlu. But then ke nami isikolo yandinika ne-clarity uba mna ndizokwenza njani. Besingagqibisa yedwa le ncoko. Let's take it back to studio. It's your boy, uGcina Mdikane, Tshavo.
In actual fact, it is enshrined in our Bill of Rights that South Africans have the right to basic and adequate housing. Now, umukwele papa mola abalela are having a home, not a house, a home makes you feel whole. Au feel ungari wa shota. Ibe ke diputsa hore na batswadi ba rona ba na le title deed. Wa tsara le dintlu, re dula go dintlu mara re tshibore na ba na le title deed na. Let's have a conversation with our audience. We do have them in studio again. Remember, we are observing COVID protocols. Sesingeti angitshele lana uthi masikhuluma nge-ownership, especially of indlu, how does that make you feel? What type of emotions does it invoke in you?
Ngathi feeling like ujabule kakhulu, into like jabulisa kakhulu kwathi ukuthi nginendlu yami. Yes.
So if you were to say ukuthi ufuna ukuthenga indlu la eSouth Africa, do you feel ukuthi le process is easy for wena to be able to access ownership yezindlu?
Yes, it is. Why not?
Sure. Asize ngapha kupalisa. Sisipalisa ngiyazi ukuthi wena ekhaya uhlala nogogo endlini. Do you know who has the title deed yasendlini, and have you seen it mhlawumbe egcekeni?
No, like i-title deed angiyazi ukuthi into enjani. But okay, istress sami esi1 singebo ukuthi ugogo mezoshona. Because lapha ekhaya singabazukulu sonke. So angazi ukuthi egcineni ubani ozothola indlu, ubani uzenzani, because egcineni sizolwa sodwa silwisane sibulalane for into engiyona yethu, because obviously indlu yagogo. So egcineni masobulalana nabantwana basekhaya kuzobe sekuyinkinga futhi, yabo. So enye into enginayo ukuthi like i-government yase South Africa it's failing us ngendlela eningi, because abanye abantu bahlala kuma-RDPs but abanayo ama-title deed. Ama-RDPs ayathengiswa these days,
Yeah.
just like that, yabo. So
into eshona khona ukuthi siphezulu komhlaba kodwa su own umhlaba. Quick one but wami, what do you feel about the fact that we don't have access to land?
I think that's where. Sure, thank you, my brother. I think that's where most of the problems when it comes to ownership stem from, right?
Yeah.
The fact that people do not have land, and the land is in private ownership. You spoke about a stadium that was built on 15 million, and we only see chairs there. You'd find maybe they had to buy the land where the stadium is supposed to be put. So most of the money, and even when you go for home financing, right, we're university students, we go there, we get our basic salaries afterwards, but most of our peers stay in mid-rent or stay in apartments inside the city because there's no land for them to go and build on. So I think it stems from there. That is the basic problem in this conversation of ownership. You pay a bond, you pay, most of the money goes to the land that it's built on, to someone else's pocket, because they have ownership and claiming of the land. So you can own that apartment, but it's never going to be yours if you don't own the land.
Hey, wabeki iphuzu bafo.
Hey, what I bear taba ki no na. Ritori yaga kai so na dintlo tse re nyakang go di owner now. We do have your voice notes coming through, so let's hear what you had to say.
Basically, home ownership is a investment. It's actually a lifetime achievement, because if you own a home, it's forever. It's forever. It's actually something that can be held by generations and generations. Owning a home means that you've got a future tomorrow. There is a future tomorrow. So it's actually an advantage, and it's something that is going to make you build a family. It's an advantage in life to own a home.
An absolute advantage indeed. And I think to stretch the conversation even further, it's not even just about access to home ownership. It's dignified homes,
Yeah.
affordable housing. I think my brother put it really, because if you look at the cost of home ownership in South Africa, it's just a burden on people because
And abaningi bakhelela ukuthi ekugcineni the fear of qualifying alone is a bigger trauma than actually sending that application to get declined. Bugeli uyazi ukuthi there's a lot of history here. I mean, dating before apartheid to date of how we've been affected. But we're going to also touch a bit about the rural areas because siyazi bathintekile kakhulu because some of them don't even know what a title deed looks like. Hlala nathi saye Itolo bese uyakwazi ukuqhubeka.
Municipal rates. Hi, my name is Nicolette Mashile. Today we're talking about home ownership. Want to understand Corona? Ma? Oh. Hi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million. No problem. 10 million, 11 million, 12 million, 15 million, or 22 million. Asaz. Welcome back to Daily Thetha and navigator ownership of homes in South Africa. We're trying to get an understanding of where is the actual speed hump, where are the pain points, and how do we move forward in finding a solution that works for everybody, in fact. Let me give you a case, a very specific one. The Nkwinti brothers down in the Eastern Cape, they were fighting with Awusi Wabona because Awusi na batla go dira mereko ko gae, a traditional ceremony. They're saying, Awusi, who own this home, if they were still alive, they would not bless the ceremony of yours. But she's asking herself, but I thought this is also my home. And in my home, I should be able to do the things that I need to do. So how do we deal with those kind of issues? Because they pop up, especially when we look at the rural setting. But parents also,
and that's also very important to understand, Nicolette, because in the same time, kunesintu that plays into this element that we need to be able to consider it of. But of course, my guests will see that we have better knowledge about this conversation, and they're going to allow us to understand how important is it for family to be able to understand each other, for family to be able to get to a point of, listen, solve lento without going against each other, of course. Of course, bringing our guest here, Ukona Uzunani Mkiva, of course, who is the manager at Uzunani Mkiva Foundation, but also not just that, he's someone who specializes in rural development and communities that are struggling when it comes to being able to find resources to put things together. But not only that, Ukona again, of course, Nomlayo Mabhena, who is an associate, of course, and she deals with dispute resolution at her firm. and she'll also assist us in this conversation to be able to get to the point of, do we understand what it takes to be able to come to resolution? So welcome to our guest this morning.
All the time we're hearing about this issue, especially in the rural setting, the people who originally owned the house. The passing on of that asset becomes a bit difficult. Can you take us through some of the issues that come up?
Well, a home belongs to everybody who is a member of the family. And obviously, Emakaya, there's this notion of custodianship, which is normally given to the eldest son. But it doesn't mean that it then belongs to him. He is just given the responsibility, extra responsibilities to manage the affairs of the family, consulting with other siblings and other family members. So many people often confuse this to think that once you are given that title of custodianship, then it belongs to you as a person, which is wrong. So in terms of the African tradition, when there's a dispute, people must sit together until they find each other through sufficient consensus. And they have to consider the customs, the traditions, as well as the values and the norms of the family. Take, for instance, the example that you are making. If one of the siblings is seen to be bringing in an alien value to the family and he or she wants to do something that is not known and not acceptable, he needs to make that presentation, but he must be listened to make that presentation, because it may be something that is linked to his health and his life. And it may be life-threatening. So there has to be a listenership.
Naila is lasa corner, because often letter the Western side, which is the law now. And when this conversation, I mean, the lady that started off in the audience spoke about she's worried the title deed. So what was the old system of giving away maybe stands to be able to have umhlaba
umhlaba ngokwesintu ithi indodana xa ifikelele kwixabiso lokubana ibe nomfazi iye ke ngoku nefamily yayo komkhulu kuyocelwa isiza apho kuza kwakhelwa khona lo mzi. And the title deed asinayo thina, but what you would refer to as a title deed in a cultural setting would be inkaba zabantwana bakho, okay, as well as the graves. They are a clear demonstration that this land belongs to this family. And that's why in the African culture, a home is priceless, and it cannot be used as a collateral to take a loan or something, because it is not something that could be used for trading. It is a permanent feature. It is the cardinal feature of that particular family for generations to come. Because kulapho kulele khona inkaba zabantwana belikhaya, kulapha kufihlwe khona abantu abadala nezinyanya zelikhaya zilapha kule ndawo ayonto inothengiswa.
And lento mhlambe sithi sibuzo uNomlayo, when we look at the succession elements over the years and the opportunity that are there for inheritance in the right way, ikuphi la gcina sesithola wrong corner? Where does it go wrong?
I think that the issue comes, what Justice Nicolette was saying, when we're trying to mix our culture and Western culture. But we live in a society where those things are now combined to a point where we cannot actually divorce the two concepts. So we understand that in African culture, you would prefer to just say, the home is a home. Anyone is welcome in my home. I don't need to write a will. I don't need to do anything else. The home is open to everybody. But as soon as the patriarch or the matriarch in that home passes away, you start getting the disputes like the one that you're now telling us about, where there was no will, there's no agreement as to what can happen and what cannot happen in this home. And we now need to start finding a dispute resolution mechanism amongst ourselves. And I have to agree with Uputzolani, who says that in family concepts, you do need to kind of get to a point where you can mediate something together without going to court. I do understand that in the case that you're mentioning, the parties are going to court. I personally would have preferred that the parties go to maybe mediation, and so they can find each other halfway to preserve the family structure. And but the issue that we do have is people not leaving a will. No one knows where assets are supposed to go. And when you die interstate, we say, well, if you die without a will, we say you've died interstate, meaning your descendants must now inherit everything equally. So if you are, let's say, a single mom, you have 5 children. If you pass away and you leave a house, it goes to all 5 children. And all of them are entitled to this house jointly and severally.
Ke mina ngihlala esitheni mina ngifuna ukuthengisa ke sesithini manje.
So there are a couple options open to you. Let's say it's not an RDP house. Let's leave that conversation. Let's say it's a normal house, and it's a normal house that your parents bought. It's not subsidized by the government, and you want to sell. Your 4 siblings don't want to sell. They can always buy your share out. They can buy you out and remain, and you have no right to the house at that point. That's allowed. So when you separate your estate and you guys decide to write out what we are going to take, this is what we're doing, they are allowed to buy you out, but you must understand that you are now losing the rights that come with your ownership of that property.
Uyazi ntakhuluma ngayo, it reminds me ukuthi just in the month of September it was a National Wills Month where uthola ithuba ukuthi they could write your will for absolutely for free in any registered attorney. Kodwa sibuyisela kancane ekhaya, I mean into the real spaces. I think about umuntu obukele omusha ohlele ekhaya who is saying ukuthi ngifuna ukuthenga umhlaba, for example. Let's say it's not an inheritance outright, but kunomhlaba ovulekile and ngifuna ukuyocela enkosini. What are the normal procedures for procuring land in that element?
Well, the procedure is almost the same. The young people are allowed to own or to occupy a space in the rural communities. First of all, land is communally owned in the rural setting, and land is not for sale. And this is in line with the prescripts of our African culture. The issue of selling land was brought about through colonization. And therefore, if you want to do a project in rural communities, you simply go komkhulu enkosini, uyocela ucacise, kubizwe imbizo kuthiwe lo mfana together nabanye bafuna ukwenza iproject lo hlobo. Iyanikezela into eyenzekayo yonke imihla.
So why then are people struggling with home ownership? Is it because sifuna izindlu zase edrobheni? Because if we can just go to inkosi sicele umhlaba siyakhe, then we should all have homes.
There is no such a problem in the rural communities. The problem of people wanting to occupy land is mainly found in the urban spaces. And it is simply because we are allowing the perpetuation of coloniality in terms of the policy perspective when it comes to home ownership and land ownership. If we were just to go back to who we are as the Africans, then we would have a tenure system that is the same, that is common to all of us. This confusion that you've got a tenure, a system that is meant for people who reside in urban areas and another which is meant for people who reside in rural, it's the same thing of separate development, and it needs to be rejected. So basically that's the corrective issue that we have to take. Land must never be seen as something that is used for sale, because then it is only those who have money that will have access to it. And if you don't have money, then you're landless. So you live in a situation of landlords and those who don't have.
Lendo Kulma Puzulani speaks exactly to, of course, what we're going to be seeing after the ad break. Jobesus Kulma Base Vizinyawa, Ngane Alexandra. Because the colors is exactly that. Access. Those who have money, we born Abahambela Pambili, and Gubangas Bonabana voice. And Kalu to say it all. Plus, Puya squads, good sis, good Sabat Base Vizinyawa, but Kalangan Gaslegat.
Morning, people. Poloko chairperson wa Vezinyawo. Renali problem, serious problem with Vezinyawo. Issues around us and housing, around us with the government. As you can see, remove Vezinyawo right now. Whole lot of things. This was supposed to be a transit camp, temporary village for people. Brought here 2006 for 3 months to go to houses, RDP houses. It's 2021, right at the end. We are still here. We are still going on. Even now, housing, as congested as we are, they are bringing people again into this yard. So it's been years, my guy, since Ngilogo Sila. So I just want to do, have and own my own place, my own space. I've lost so many things. I've lost the respect. You lose dignity. You lose ubuwena nje ukuthi, I mean, come on. If housing can come and say tomorrow, hey guys, we're moving you out, because we don't know, it's them calling the shots. The place, it's not right for so many years. People here are building illegally. People are building on top of main holes, on top of under the transformers. Not having a home, ni lose ubu irrespect. Ni lose ubu mina, ni lose ubuntu. This temporary place, who can visit you here? Ubani ozokuvakashela lana? Nilala kanjani? Nilala kanjani? And abangani, they can't just pick you up, nihambe. You family members cannot come and visit you because these houses are too small. Are too small. Yes, the plan was right, it would be a temporary shelter so that we move with better living conditions, better houses, bigger space. But
sure, when temporary becomes your entire life, you lose a respect, not only from third-party people, but yourself as a person. And I mean, if you actually took time to look at some of those visuals that we showed on screen, you can see right across is the big bad sentence. Dignified home ownership in South Africa. RDP was a noble program in South Africa, but it's actually just become worse and worse for our people in South Africa. And you've got to ask yourself, what is the actual problem here? William, as you are watching Puti Puloko Moguera, how are you feeling?
Ke feel hore government ya re failure because batho ba bangata ba lore khale ba ngwadiste di-RDP, right? Aba so dithole mara ba bangwe ba lore ba ne le tšhelete ba kgona o ntsha tšhelete ka masaiteng gore ba kgona o thola di-RDP too. O ka re wa sheba o thole motho sala ngwadisa RDP khale o 1980 something 1990 something mara aba so thole even now.
What is Zulani ubulele ka laba gore we all deserve to be able to build a house because that's how our systems were before we adopted this Western system. So go wena you've even put it aside. RDP.
Okay. RDP ngaithola ne? All right. But how?
How?
Okay. And I think it's a key part to also campus Nomlayo ukuthi how many cases have you witnessed Jobutila when available and get dispute resolution ukuthi how many cases have you seen between the citizens and government going back and forth, and has there any been cases where the citizens actually won?
So lapho mina ngisebenza khona, I deal with private disputes where a house is probably sold by two people to two different people. That's the space that I'm in. But when we look at the statistics of where our RDP houses are, we can only imagine that those disputes are many when it comes to where people registered for RDP, but they've been waiting for 20 years, 25 years. But most of those cases are dealing with the public protector who looks at email administration of different government departments, and she deals basically with those cases. And some of them have been resolved. And if you look at the public protector reports, they do talk about the number of cases, the number of people that they've helped. And I think that is where people actually need to go and report. So we see, you know, they built 10,000 houses here. All of us were in the waiting list, and none of us are in there. That's the office you go to. That's where you go and resolve the issue for yourself.
And okhuluma ngayo, if ubonile just kule video une interview ku noPoloko, you could see izindlu ziyakhula day by day. But umthetho uthini ngalento enziwa ukuthengisa kwezindlu za RDP?
So Yabana Housing Amendment Act says that if you have lived in an RDP house for less than 8 years, you are not allowed to sell it at all. If you want to vacate the property, you want to move to another province or whatever the case is, you must offer it back to the government. And what the government must do is reallocate it to somebody else. But what people do is they sell this property. First of all, abana a title deed, abana a consent of the government, and you're selling this house to somebody else. And that next person also has no rights in that house, because remember, you sold it illegally yourself. So you have this whole myriad of people who are in houses they don't even own. They also, so it's not addressing the problems in the way that people think it's addressing them by buying RDP houses.
So a criminal activity just going on and on and on.
It's just perpetuating a system of homelessness, because eventually someone else can come back and say, this was my grandmother's house, this is her title deed. What do you say? You bought it from someone.
Let's take it to Putsolani. Putsolani, I want to ask you a double barrel question. First and foremost, are RDPs adequate enough for us as Abantu Abamnyama to even call them homes? Is that something that we can really, really dignifiedly call home? And then Massachusetts, okay, maybe it is. What is this criteria? How do I qualify even for an RDP?
Well, the RDP houses, I think what we are talking about them at this point, it's no longer over now. We're talking about decent housing.
Yes.
And then we can call them homes, because we're talking about 3-bedroom and decent enough to house a family. But what we have to deal with is this issue of selling them. We should completely amend the policy and the law to say that no more sales.
Okay.
It's your home, and it should only be under extreme circumstances, like Usus Nomlayo was saying, when maybe you have to change, you're going overseas or you're going to another province.
Yes.
And number two, another issue which is linked to this question is the fact that if you apply for a RDP house in the Eastern Cape or Western Cape or Gauteng, you should only apply in one province. What is happening in the country is that you find Abo Clever who go all over the show. Bafagama application in all the provinces. You find that one individual owns 9 RDP houses, one in each of the provinces. So this is the criminality and the corruption that we're talking about. Maybe we need to come up with one single policy as the national government which talks to all the provinces, so that it's like when you appear in the ballot.
Yeah,
you can't appear in the ballot paper in all the provinces.
Yeah.
You only appear in one place. So it should be the same when it comes to the ownership. So in answering your question is that we do need these RDP houses. Government is doing a good job by ensuring that we dispense these houses, because there's a historical issue that is linked to that. We are trying to do away with the shacks, because we don't want our people to live in shacks like chickens and live in crawls like cattle. So we are addressing that in order to alleviate completely the shack dwellers is to come up with this approach. Who qualify anybody who does not have a roof above the head. Yes, it doesn't have to be an elderly person. Both young and old do qualify, but we check the income levels of those people, so that you and me, who are said to be in the middle class, we are not also applying in that space. Actually, anybody who earns above a particular amount of money who is found to be also applying for an RDP house should be charged.
Absolutely.
Because you don't qualify to be there.
Absolutely.
It must be for those that are really needy people.
Yazi lento imele ngicabanga sise lento besikhuluma ngayo izolo i-spatial planning ukuthi we want to be able ukuthi sifake enough houses, but gibuka igoli, there's so many people that flock to Johannesburg because of the challenges that they face in their provinces, that you question them, are they at fault for trying to be corrupt? Because abanye bakhalela ukuthi anginalutho kumele ngizame. Kodwa na umlayezo ongenayo kaBongiwe Dayibongs uthi ke my mother bought a house in 2010. She owned it, but the person who sold the house to her didn't change the papers to her name. And that's difficult because we stay with her, and I don't know what will happen if she dies. I'm afraid we may be homeless. And I think Ubongiwe Ntaisho is the same thing that was mentioned by one of our audience members earlier. Ayinzima kumina. But now, another question maybe after the break is that is it really the people's fault or the government's fault when it comes to regulation?
Definitely. When we come back from the ad break, let's talk a little bit about sectional title, regulations, the law. What does it say? We get to learn from Uzaman Tuma. Please do stay with us. Welcome back to Daily Thetha. Navigator around home ownership in South Africa. We've learned quite a lot. We've gone through the understanding what an RDP house is and how actually the program should be working in South Africa, but it needs all South Africans to come to the party. Now let's look a little bit at what is happening in some of the major cities. There's a thing called sectional title schemes that seems to be on the rise, and many of us are not really very inclined. And when you buy, for instance, an apartment, you don't really know what are some of the regulations that you need to live under. And we want to really get into that conversation. We do have Uzamantungwa Khumalo, who's also joining the conversation, and she is a real estate property entrepreneur. Zamantungwa, welcome to Daily Thetha.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicolette.
Asiqalelana yini le sectional title ngoba siyayibona kuyakhuluma busy yini sectional title scheme?
I think a great way you could differentiate between the sectional title and what so many of us are used to growing up is, you know, ekasi umuntu nomuntu uhlala endlini ninejaridi lenu and yonke into okwazi ukuyenza kwakho origini you guys have made the rules nama neighbors wenu anikwazi ukusho ukuthi umuntu uyenzani. But when we look at sectional title scheme communities, you find ukuthi it's communal living, right? So anikho one. When we look at the big cities, we're buying into developments where there are apartments or clusters, and sometimes kuba nezindlu where it's a gated community, so it's an estate. And uma ngabe uzothenga in communities like that, akusebenzi the same way that we are unfortunately used to living at home. And I think abaningi bethu who move from ekas or even the rural areas, when we come to the city and we're either renting or like buying in these sectional title communities, we struggle ngoba sijwayele ukuthi hayibo, but ukwami lana I can do whatever I want kwami. So I think understand ukuthi fundamentally akufani, and the wonke ama scheme anama rules ahlukile, and you need to acquaint yourself with it before, especially if uzothenga, you know, at least more rent uyakwazi ukuthi uyamove, but mawuzothenga acquaint yourself with it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So maybe I mean, Zamantonga, you look at how now there's a rise in people living in these homes, and opposed to a standalone. A standalone are no longer as attractive, and I want to understand yindaba yini sizathu salokho.
I mean, I think it's twofold. It's not even that standalone are not as attractive. When we look at the big cities, right, there's only so much space we're going to have in big cities. I think, Tina, in South Africa, on the one hand, we are fortunate in that it's a new city, you know, in relative terms, when we look at the New Yorks and the Londons and the other big cities. And we know what we're going to ultimately run out of space. So we can't do ijariti lako uiwan 2,000 square meters in the city. Like emakhaya, we're definitely able to do that. But as you were saying earlier, abantu abaningi move from emakhaya or semi-urban areas, we're moving to the city. And so if we're going to be moving to the city, we understand to the city with all the economic nodes have only so much space. And so we, obviously then developers use a system of building that's been there. I mean, and it has been there in the country and even other parts of the world, where we have those complexes, you know, sometimes even clusters, and estates, and as I mean, flat, if you look at a town, flat is a sectional title, right? And so when we look at that, we also know that the advantages, dealing at all the costs of running that place uyi-one, niyazi ukuthi niyashare as abantu abahlala lapho. So even something like security, uyazi ukuthi asukuphela ubhadalela towards, you know, the security company, but that's a cost that's shared across wonke umuntu. So it's not going anywhere. I mean, if anything, South Africa, I think it's currently in the top 5 in terms of the number of sectional title communities in the world, and we're well on our road to being the leader in sectional title communities. So Tina, getting a good understanding of how it's working, and what we need to know before we buy or invest in those sectional title communities, because I think so many people bangena without having a full sense of what the repercussions actually are.
I think it's definitely very important for us to get that full sense, right? But before we get into that, Sis Zamantungu, I want to just quickly come to Nomlayo. I mean, so you work in the conveyancing space. Let's talk a little bit about these sectional title scheme regulations. Because as Zama said, I already understand the Kapa, are they really a setback, especially for a black child? Because maybe Gunezinto doesn't understand the lab.
I don't think it's a setback. I have to agree with the system. This is where we're going, because this is where our economy is.
Yeah.
But I think the issue is sectional titles disrupted what we know about land ownership. So we understand land ownership as I need to see the ground and my house is on it, and this is my home. But what sectional titles have done is that now you can own a piece of land somewhere in the air, you know. Before you used to own land and you own everything going down, everything coming up. But now a sectional title says you own this little piece of thing, of a block, and it's yours. It's still your home, and regardless of what happens, it has disrupted the definition of land, but it doesn't take away from your ownership of that land. So the only part that gets a little bit different, so even the way they're registered, it's not different to how you register your house. You register a sectional title in a different register, yes, at the deeds office, but you still own that little piece.
Okay, perhaps let me rephrase. What then is prejudicing abantu abamnyama ngale sectional title scheme? Because it feels, for instance, maybe I'll bring it back to you, Zamantungwa. It feels like why indlu yami?
And I think that's the where the conflict starts, or where the tension starts. Tina, it's indlu yami khalisicathulo sami. If ngifuna ukuthi kusasa ngivuke ngipende indlu ngaphandle, and this is a good nice example. Ngifuna ukupenda indlu yakho brown kusasa. In a sectional title scheme community, you'll find that the block is painted a particular color. When angeke uvuke kusasa uthi mina le part yami, let's say une ground floor unit, le part yami actually ngifuna ibe like purple, even though the whole block is gray. And so it speaks to what she was saying. We have to rethink ownership, right? And understand when you're then owning a sectional title, you're owning everything that's inside. So even the outside bit, angeke uthi no, actually ngifuna ukutshintsha ama window, angithandi la ma windows sasebenzisayo in this, you know, in this apartment block. mina ngifuna lawa aluminium this color. You can't do that because the rules would be like you don't even
can't
change
do that,
outside,
yeah.
you know, things. And so when we then understand this is how this works, you realize, okay, it's not so much that I'm being prejudiced, it's that ihlukile from what I grew up in. Because even ekhaya we'd be like, but we would even do the garden the way we want to do it. Whereas lana, you don't do the own garden because the gardener is ayo. Sometimes depending if, let's say, HOA, you must have done the garden. If you let your weeds grow, they will fine you. We are lazy this month, no one is doing the garden.
And it's fine.
But lana, it's not fine. So we need to understand it's very different from lente sikhule siyazi, and it's not that yintembi necessarily, it's different. And when we understand what the difference is and and all the costs associated now, because that's the other thing where we end up feeling prejudiced, ngoba understand costs that have to do with it. And there are even rules that regulate that, right? I mean, it's illegal for them to say you can't slaughter. So slaughtering, you're allowed to slaughter in your sectional titles, meluba notify. So angeke nje figure out of nowhere, let's say you are allowed to slaughter. And even with a rule book, no slaughtering is allowed. But you must give prior thing.
Notice.
This is what's going to be happening. And analysis says
Here's an interesting social media question coming in from Mukalapo. Gilbert Mushikidi. What can be done if you're married under community of property and you want to keep on being the sole owner? Now, of course, we're going to make sure that we answer this question when we come back from the ad break. So let's take that ad break. When we come back, answer the question and get into a little bit about how do we find the financing for our homes. Welcome back to Daily Thetha, talking about navigating home ownership. If you've missed the beginning of our show, don't worry, it is on Facebook, so you can catch it later at the convenience of your own time. Now, we've had a very interesting conversation, and right now we want to get into the part that speaks about financial muscle. Many of us are told this idea that you can approach the banks, but you find out for the first time when you put in that home application, actually, you're just not good enough. Affordability, credit scores, it all comes down to that as to whether the bank is going to borrow you some money. The question is, are South Africans so desperate for home ownership that they are willing to take any type of loan?
Yeah, and then Zima, just from a personal experience, when it comes to home financing, you also need to understand every time you apply, it affects your credit score.
Absolutely.
So if we apply, and that makes people again more conscious of, hey, I'm not ready, I'm not good enough. I guess before the ad break, what can be done if you're married under community of property and you want to keep on being sole ownership? Of course, Nomlayo, I'll probably throw it to you.
So it's quite unfortunate that the person is already married. So what happens if Nishada, and the automatic system in South Africa is in community of property. So the moment you get married, your assets and his assets come into one estate. So for you to change that, because remember what you're talking about, applying for credit and all of that, banks look at not just my credit, but my partner's credit, not just my assets, my partner's assets. So now when you want to now remove an asset from this estate that has been evaluated by everybody, you have to apply to court to try and separate the two estates. And you have to notify all your creditors, but you can't just move the property out of the estate by yourself. You have to apply to court.
So if uma uyena or in this situation and I can't assist or angikwazi ukumkhulumela, if umama doesn't do it, should it
If Uma doesn't do it and you are the child, and it's you already have a right to that house if Uma passes, whether it's in community of property or not. So if Ubaba passes or Uma passes, the spouse, the surviving spouse, gets half of the estate, right? The other half, as children, you also inherit those parts. So even that house that's in the estate, the joint estate, you still have a claim to it, even if, let's say, ngo stepma, ngo stepbaba, or whatever the case is. But if your parent is the one that owned half that estate, you still have an entitlement to it. But you cannot change in communal property by yourself. You need to go to court. Yeah.
I'd like to pose the question for both yourself, Zamantonga and Butsalani. As South African, especially young people in South Africa, really pressure because we want a home ownership, that we find ourselves sometimes going into things like sectional development, not understanding, or even taking up a home loan that we don't actually understand.
I mean, I definitely think there is a group of us who have the pressure to buy.
Yeah.
Right? I think we also need to understand, Uguti, it's okay to rent. We need to normalize renting, and even to the point where you can rent well into your mid-40s, for instance. When we look at, especially my young professionals, bafuna ukuthi I want to buy a place, and there's sometimes a false sense of, okay, now I've made it, I'm an adult, without having a full understanding of what you've actually signed up for. Whereas if you look at it backwards, I mean, part of the questions we'd ask you is, okay, are you looking to stay in this place, let's say, for the next 7 to 10 years? If the answer is no, typically we'd be like, then don't buy, because you'd find that it's actually going to work out cheaper for you to rent in a place, and even rent in that same complex that you wanted to buy into, including utilities. Because the moment sozo tenga indlu, you're looking at not just the bond, there's going to be insurance, there's going to be levies, there's going to be rates and taxes, and there's going to be utility. Any maintenance, you have to pay for it. So there is a group that has the pressure. On the same, and then the other side of the coin is that we're also, as I think young South Africans, abaning to realize, for example, ekasi and in a family home, right, where it wasn't just umama no baba and you as the siblings, and there were different siblings. And so there's also a part of us that wants to be able to access home, and whether it's renting, because abanye baqala ngokurenta, and sometimes even renting yakona uthanda ukuthi mhlambe ngabe at a back room, mhlambe now you want your own, place. And so there's definitely a group where it's unnecessary. You can rent, it's okay. And then there's a group where we have to have a hard conversation as young South Africans. We grew up in homes where usually besibani, abantwana bakagogo, and now it's okay, what does home ownership actually look like for me? And especially if ufuna ukuhlala ekasi, right? And ekasi, where, as we were saying earlier, sometimes ufuna ukuthenga indlu, there might be issues of who actually owns this property. So when ufuna ukuhlala kuma suburbs, ufuna ukuhlala ekasi. And so kuleo group, it's a difficult one. Ngoba the price is hefty. The moment we go to certain suburban areas, the price is hefty. And so it becomes a difficult one. Okay, then labo bantu who are in that situation, what are their options actually?
Kutsalani?
Well, I would speak about what needs to happen, because I don't want to repeat what she says, because it is mouthful. But I think the pressure to buy property must be actually appreciated in the South African context, because we have a history of not owning anything. Now, what I would say is that rather than us as the young South Africans jumping to buy big cars, we should actually start with property. The second thing that I want to say is that when property is bought in South Africa, you are given 20 years to pay it back. I think that needs to change. Instead of, if you buy a car for 1.5 million, you pay it within 5 years at most. But if you buy a property of 1.5 million, you are said you must pay it over 20 years. I think we need to reduce that term. And also, we need to regulate the pricing of property in South Africa, considering where we come from. Because the price is determined by the private sector, which is totally inconsiderate of the background of the issues of property in the country.
Yeah.
So we need to look into that so that we have a fair pricing model so that many people can afford. Secondly, it should not only be the private banks that make
giving finance.
availability the financing of the house. I
Yeah.
think the state must intervene rigorously so that we can deal with this backlog that I'm talking about. So for me, those are the two suggestions that I will throw into the table, which can transform the property ownership in the country in a very big way.
And transformation is indeed what we need.
And we've seen Itok Fela have started building into this thing of helping abantu, finding ways. But for me, it's a good start of saying, let's find more owners into our markets. And
I think it's just so unfortunate that property is an asset, it's still seen an asset in the global space, right? So you almost have to remember, but they want to make money with their properties at the same time, whereas you've got a country like South Africa that needs a lot of redress, and rightfully so, the property sector definitely needs transformation.
Yeah. No, so this morning cool to all our guests that have come, of course, and also to our studio audience, knowing that it's our first week back, Sen Corner. Of course, we are back tomorrow. Of course, and we want to know, are you going to be here? Because if you are, keep the hashtag going. Daily Thetha.
Definitely, please do recap on the show on our Facebook page. And let's talk tomorrow. I think dignity is quite an important one. We can even bring back dignity, dignified homes, dignity in terms of spatial planning.
A home to be dignified.
You know what? Our people need dignity. But thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Asbonge.